last sort of part of the notes, aside from the other structures in the forebrain that you need to know, so the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the corpus callosum, those structures that are kind of inside the brain, when we're talking about the cerebral cortex, which is the outside, it can be divided roughly into 4 lobes. Now, if you look at the picture, there's definitely more than 4 things labeled, but I hope you can see that there are 4 colors, plus the cerebellum, which was part of a different part of the brain. There's this bluish section, and everything in the blue section is part of the frontal lobe. So the frontal lobe is made up of all that kind of light blue, plus the motor strip and the Broca area. The frontal lobe of the brain, in general, is in charge of reasoning, critical thinking, memory, personality, and very specifically, articulated language. The Broca area, the one that's this brighter blue color, it's responsible for making words come out of your mouth as sounds. That's what articulated language means. It's different than receptive language, where you hear words and you understand what they mean. This is you making words come out of your mouth. The other part of the frontal lobe is the motor strip, or the motor area. This is the part of your brain that controls movement. And like I said in the notes, it's disproportionate. There are way more neurons controlling, say, the movement of your fingers, which can do really fine skills. I can't play the piano, but that's a good example of something that uses a lot of really fine motor skills. Something as simple as writing with a pen or a pencil is something that requires you to control very specifically all of these little muscles in your fingers. There's less control over some of the big, larger pieces, like the top of your leg. Yes, you have motor neurons to control the top of your leg, but not nearly as many as you have controlling your fingers because of the types of movement that they need to do. You also have a lot of motor neurons controlling your face, in particular your mouth, so that you can speak. And so it makes sense that this spoken language section part of the brain is in the frontal lobe as well. So the frontal lobe, like its name suggests, is at the front of the brain. So we're looking at a brain from the side here. Down here would be if we were looking at the brain from the top. And this little thing sticking out, that's the person's nose, so that you know that that's the front. So the frontal lobe would be sort of here on that picture. But usually when we're showing the lobes of the brain, we show a side view because you can't see all of them from the top. Now, does anyone want to ask anything about frontal lobe? I was watching a show on TV the other day, and they, in a joking way, claimed they were going to do a lobotomy on a person. They were in a psychiatric facility, and the girl was just going to stab him through the nose with a nail and hope that that fixed his personality issues. But the not so funny thing is, that used to be a thing. That used to be a potential treatment for various personality and psychiatric issues, would be to cut or remove part of the frontal lobe of the brain, because that's the part that deals with personality. Now the next lobe, well, maybe not. Can we go to the next lobe? Is the parietal lobe. So all of the orange here is part of the parietal lobe. You'll see that right next to the motor strip that's in your frontal lobe, there's a sensory strip. The parietal lobe's main function is to receive and process sensory information, specifically from your skin. You have other senses, like vision and taste and smell and hearing, that are processed in different areas. But the parietal lobe is for all of the receptors that you have in your skin, and we'll see in the next chapter that there are quite a few of them. As with the motor cortex, so the part in the frontal lobe, the motor strip, it's disproportionate. It's dedicated to face, hands, genitals, which is why those are the most sensitive areas. And if you're interested, there's a funny little picture in your textbook that shows a homunculus, a person that if their body was proportionate to the amount of brain that's devoted to each part, what you would look like. He's got really big hands and really big face, really huge lips, because those are the parts that have the most brain tissue dedicated. So there's your parietal lobe. It's at the back on the top. So frontal lobe is here, sort of back top is the parietal lobe. If we go to the next one, the temporal lobe. It's this green section here. Now, no one would expect you to draw the barrier between frontal, parietal, temporal lobe. If I was to indicate a lobe to you, either there would be some lines drawn on the picture showing you where each lobe began and end, or I would point so far in one direction that there's only one lobe it could be. The temporal lobe is right next to where your ear is, and that makes tons of sense because it is responsible for auditory processing and auditory reception. So not just hearing sounds, but understanding, in particular, language. There's this area here called the Wernicke area. It's comparable to the Broca area. It's the part of the brain that's responsible for understanding specifically language. You can hear lots of other sounds and interpret them, but specifically language is that part. And there's quite a bit of research into those two parts specifically and how they're different. Someone with damage to the Broca area could understand speech, but couldn't produce it properly themselves. Whereas someone with damage to the Broca or to the Wernicke area could produce language, but they wouldn't be able to understand what they hear. So that's your temporal lobe. The last of the four lobes is the occipital lobe. The occipital lobe is at the back. So right at the very base of your skull, the very back of your head, this is the occipital lobe. Its main job is to receive and analyze visual information. It helps you to recognize what you see. It would also explain why, if you get whacked in the back of the head in a sport or otherwise, sometimes you see things, stars or some other type of thing, in your visual field that's not actually there. It's because you've jammed the part of your brain that deals with seeing things. Same thing could be true for your temporal lobe. You get hit there, you might have ringing in your ear, even though there's no sound, because the part of your brain that's figuring out sound has just gotten or has just taken a hit. And then, oh good, I did put it there. Here's the little guy, if you were interested. There's the homunculus. That's what we would look like if our body was proportionate to the amount of brain that's devoted to each part. So just like gargantuous hands, really big face, really, really big lips and tongue and general mouth for all the speech functions that we need to do. It's called the homunculus.